In the early hours of June 13, 1944, the Japanese aircraft carrier Taiho quietly departed from the port of Tawi, a remote outpost located in the Sulu archipelago of the Philippines. This massive carrier was not just any warship. It carried the flag of Vice Admiral G. Saburo Ozawa, acting as his mobile command center. Alongside Taiho sailed other major warships such as the Shokaku and Zuikaku, two carriers that had already seen intense combat earlier in the war. Together, these ships formed the core of a powerful naval force that began its journey northeast. Their mission was to join the first mobile fleet and move swiftly to confront the advancing American forces who had begun landing on Saipan just 2 days later. On June 15th, the Japanese High Command understood the gravity of the situation. The loss of Saipan would allow American long-range bombers to strike deep into the Japanese home islands, putting major cities and industrial zones within reach of relentless aerial bombardment. The invasion marked a turning point, one that the Japanese Navy could not ignore. To halt the American advance, Ozawa initiated Operation Ago, a bold plan that aimed to not only protect Saipan, but also trap and cripple the U.S. Navy's carrier fleet in a decisive showdown. The concept was to lure the Americans into a battle, on terms favorable to Japan, using both land-based and carrier-launched aircraft to soften up enemy formations before the main naval force engaged. However, this ambitious strategy faced enormous challenges. Years of relentless combat had weakened Japan's naval power, with earlier battles like Midway and the long Guadalcanal campaign resulting in heavy losses of both ships and skilled aviators. Fuel was another critical issue. Allied submarines had disrupted Japan's supply lines by sinking many of the oil tankers that once carried vital resources to the home islands. What little fuel remained had to be sourced from places like Borneo, and its poor quality caused constant engine problems and emitted dangerous fumes that jeopardized crews. Despite these significant constraints, Ozawa was able to assemble an imposing fleet. His force included 9 aircraft carriers, 5 battleships, 10 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and a substantial escort of destroyers. All these vessels were placed under the first mobile fleet and tasked with intercepting the American invasion fleet. Facing them was the U.S. Fifth Fleet, led by Admiral Raymond Spruance. The American side held a substantial advantage, not just in numbers, but also in technology, radar systems, pilot training, and logistical support. The U.S. fleet had 15 carriers, 7 battleships, and nearly 1,000 carrier-based aircraft, giving them roughly twice the air power of the Japanese. Spruance knew Japan would not let Saipan fall without a fight. He considered several possibilities, including a direct naval engagement or a flanking attempt to attack American transports near the beachheads. To counter this, he ordered his carrier groups into position to guard against both direct and indirect threats. Ozawa's plan included extensive use of land-based air power stationed across the Mariana and Caroline Islands. Hundreds of aircraft had been positioned on islands like Guam, Yap, and Rota, and were scheduled to launch coordinated strikes against American ships in the lead-up to the larger sea battle. Additionally, Ozawa believed his carrier planes had a longer operational range than their American counterparts, and he intended to use that advantage to strike first. As his fleet advanced through the Philippine archipelago, it split into 2 groups. The carrier force passed through the San Bernardino Strait, while the battleships moved through the Surigao Strait. These maneuvers were closely monitored by American submarines lurking beneath the waters. Thanks to their stealth and range, these subs were able to track and report on the Japanese fleet's movements, relaying valuable intelligence that helped the U.S. Navy prepare for what would soon become a historic naval clash known as the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Back at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of U.S. submarine forces in the Pacific, watched the situation unfold with great interest. Recognizing that a major Japanese naval counterattack was imminent, he devised a clever plan to position submarines in a pattern that could intercept enemy vessels. Lockwood envisioned a vast rectangle drawn over the Philippine Sea, likely route that any Japanese force would take to reach the Manus. He assigned for submarines Albacore Finback, Bang, and Stingray to cover each corner of this imaginary box, giving them overlapping patrol areas with a 30-mile radius. As new intelligence came in, Lockwood adjusted this formation, moving the area slightly south to better align with enemy movements. One submarine, the Cavalla, though not initially part of this trap, would soon play a major role in the events that followed. The Cavalla had only just begun its wartime service. On June 4, 1944, she left the island of Midway, a small but vital outpost in the Central Pacific. As she sailed out, escorted briefly by friendly aircraft, the crew knew they were entering hostile waters. Built by the Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut, Cavalla was a Gato-class submarine, launched and commissioned in early 1944. She was commanded by Lieutenant Commander Herman J. Kostler, an officer known for his discipline and sharp instincts. The submarine measured 311 feet in length, capable of traveling over 20 knots on the surface. She was armed with 10 torpedo tubes and carried 24 torpedoes, along with a deck gun and anti-aircraft defenses. Following her completion and testing, she transited the Panama Canal and reached Pearl Harbor, where she underwent final preparations before being assigned her first combat patrol. By June 8, Cavalla had traveled westward for several days and was now operating near Marcus Island, a remote Japanese base. During daylight hours, the submarine stayed surfaced to maximize visibility and speed, though constant vigilance was required to spot enemy aircraft. On June 9, the crew experienced an unusual moment. A slight jolt was felt near the stern of the ship. When they investigated, they found no mechanical damage but saw a wounded whale in the water, likely struck by the sub's propellers. After confirming the vessel was unharmed, the journey continued. A few days later, on June 14th, worsening weather brought high waves and low pressure, flooding parts of the upper deck. Kostler attempted to send weather updates, but interference from the storm disrupted radio communication. He decided to dive below the surface until conditions improved. By evening, the submarine had resurfaced and resumed patrol duties. That night, a message from the submarine Flying Fish arrived, reporting a potential sighting of enemy vessels. Kostler turned Cavalla toward the location and increased speed, hoping to investigate further. By late evening, the weather had cleared. They maintained this heading through the night but made no contact. On June 15th, they reached their assigned patrol zone and attempted to locate the enemy task force. Another submarine, Pintado, was operating in the same general area. The two vessels exchanged information and agreed to divide their search responsibilities. Despite hours of effort, no targets were found that day. Later that night, Cavalla came across a small convoy consisting of 2 oil tankers and 3 escorts. Kostler considered attacking but hesitated, unsure if these ships were part of the main Japanese fleet. He decided to shadow the convoy, hoping for a better opportunity, but a vigilant destroyer forced Cavalla to dive and lose contact. After surfacing, they searched in vain and eventually received new orders to shift to a different patrol sector. Unbeknownst to Kostler at the time, the convoy he had tracked was one of 2 fueling groups supporting Ozawa's carrier strike force. By this point, American commanders were becoming more confident that a major Japanese naval action was underway. While reconnaissance aircraft had not yet located the main Japanese carriers, there were increasing signs of their presence. Japanese floatplanes had been spotted, and radio intercepts pointed to coordinated fleet activity. On June 17th, Ozawa continued eastward, carefully staying out of the range of American aircraft while positioning his fleet for a surprise attack. That evening, Cavalla's radar picked up a faint contact, just a single blip 30,000 yards away. Moving on a southwest course, Kostler immediately turned the submarine and increased speed to intercept. As they closed in, more radar targets appeared. It soon became clear that they were not facing a small patrol or convoy, but something far more significant. By 8:15 p.m., radar showed 7 large contacts, including what appeared to be a carrier and several capital ships in formation. Kostler identified the carrier as the closest target and made the decision to dive for a potential attack. Sonar confirmed even more ships than radar had indicated, up to 15 in total, suggesting the presence of numerous destroyers protecting the larger warships. Kostler now understood the scale of what they had found. A powerful enemy fleet, on its way to confront American forces near Saipan. Rather than risk an early attack and expose the submarine, he chose a more cautious approach. Cavalla surfaced and sent a contact report, alerting headquarters that a major Japanese task force was moving through the Philippine Sea. As the night progressed, the enemy fleet passed by. 2 fast-moving vessels, likely destroyers, lingered behind, and Cavalla had to use careful maneuvering to avoid detection. Once the immediate threat had passed, Kostler sent a more detailed follow-up report. The information was quickly relayed up the chain of command, confirming the location, course, and speed of the enemy fleet. That single transmission became one of the most critical pieces of intelligence in the lead-up to the Battle of the Philippine Sea. It allowed American forces to position themselves more effectively and prepare for one of the most decisive naval engagements of the Second World War. The day following their earlier encounter was uneventful for the crew of the USS Cavalla. Despite multiple efforts, they were unable to re-establish contact with the main fleet. At approximately 3:45 a.m. on June 19th, while the submarine remained submerged, a low-flying aircraft passed overhead. Although the plane itself was not spotted, visually, its loud engine roar reverberated through the conning tower as it zipped by from right to left. Lieutenant Junior Grade Kasser, the officer on deck at the time, was visibly shaken, his face pale, and his demeanor nearly mute when Commander Herman Kostler entered the control room. Throughout the day, the Cavalla detected aircraft intermittently, though mostly at a safe distance. At 10:39 a.m., Kostler noticed a group of 4 planes, circling at low altitude about 15 miles away through the periscope. Shortly afterward, sounds of surface vessels began to emanate from that same direction. The masts of ships slowly came into view beneath the aircraft. barely visible on the distant horizon. Additionally, the sonar operator reported detecting more ships beyond the visual range of the periscope. Realizing they were near an enemy group, Kossler ordered the crew to battle stations and began a cautious approach. What he saw through the periscope next was nothing short of extraordinary. A total of 4 vessels had come into view, a large aircraft carrier accompanied by 2 cruisers positioned ahead to the left, and a destroyer roughly 1,000 yards off to the right. The Cavalla had stumbled upon the Japanese First Mobile Fleet. This formidable task force included the aircraft carriers Shokaku, Zuikaku, and Taiho, commanded by Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, supported by 3 cruisers and 7 destroyers. Kossler invited both his executive and gunnery officers to take turns at the periscope to verify the identity of the enemy ships. The carrier was soon confirmed to be of the Shokaku class, and indeed, it turned out to be the Shokaku itself. This massive vessel had been launched in August 1941, boasting a displacement of over 32,100 tons. It was manned by approximately 1,660 personnel and could carry up to 72 aircraft. Recognizing the strategic value of such a target, Kossler knew he had to act swiftly and decisively. He noticed a destroyer near the cruisers that might interfere with the attack, but the opportunity was too good to pass. He chose to take the risk and focus solely on the carrier, hoping the destroyer would not detect them in time. From the periscope, the destroyer, later identified as Irakazo, appeared imposing. Kossler made detailed notes while watching the carrier. At that moment, the Shokaku was in the process of landing aircraft. A large radar, resembling a bed spring, was mounted atop its foremast and a significant Japanese flag waved above. Kossler noted that there were at least 30 aircraft visible on the crowded forward flight deck, with only 1 plane still in the air. Unbeknownst to Kossler, another American submarine had earlier made contact with Ozawa's fleet. Approximately 60 miles away, the USS Albacore had launched a torpedo that struck Taiho, the flagship. Initially, the damage was assessed as minor, and Taiho continued its course toward the battle. However, due to poor damage control, the situation worsened, and the carrier eventually exploded and sank. Back aboard the Cavalla, everything was falling into place for a textbook attack. Kossler had managed to get into an ideal firing position and required only 3 brief periscope checks during the final approach. By 11:18 a.m., with the Shokaku just 1,200 yards away, he ordered the launch of 6 torpedoes set to run 15 feet deep. Despite the submarine's stealth, Kossler remained anxious about the nearby destroyer, positioned directly ahead at an estimated distance of 1,500 yards. As the torpedoes left their tubes, Kossler ordered the submarine to dive rapidly. The last 2 torpedoes, numbers 5 and 6, were launched during this descent. About 50 seconds after the first torpedo was fired, the crew felt the first explosion, quickly followed by 2 more, each spaced roughly 8 seconds apart. The remaining torpedoes seemed to miss their mark, as no further detonations were heard. Kossler believed only 3 torpedoes had struck the target. He turned the Cavalla to the left and instructed the crew to prepare for potential depth charge attacks, maintaining strict silence as they descended further to avoid detection. On the surface, the crew of the Shokaku had only seconds to respond. Spotters had seen the incoming torpedoes approaching from the starboard side. The carrier's captain ordered an evasive maneuver, but it was too late. The torpedoes struck both the forward and central portions of the ship. The impact caused the vessel to list to starboard, and it fell out of formation with the destroyer Urakazi still nearby. After this successful strike, Kossler's priority shifted from offense to survival. He maneuvered Cavalla deeper in an attempt to quietly escape the expected onslaught. Within minutes, the Japanese counterattack began. The first wave of depth charges exploded in 2 groups of 4, landing dangerously close. 1 set detonated forward and to the left of the submarine, while the second group traveled from left to right. The crew held their positions silently as the Cavalla continued its evasive maneuvers. At 11:44 a.m., 1 destroyer passed directly overhead at high speed. The roar of its propellers filled the interior of the submarine, yet no immediate depth charges were dropped during that pass. Despite the initial intensity, the worst was not over. 3 Japanese destroyers began hunting Cavalla aggressively. The depth charges continued for nearly 90 minutes. However, by around 1:30 p.m., only 1 destroyer remained in pursuit. The sonar had gone quiet, and Kossler hoped they might finally be slipping away. He noticed the explosions were now occurring farther away, between the submarine's position and the area of the earlier attack. About 30 minutes later, the submarine's JP sound detection equipment began picking up aquatic noises from the direction of the strike. Carefully, Kossler ordered the submarine to return to periscope depth. Distant depth charge explosions still echoed in the background, while the underwater noises suggested that something significant was happening at the site of the earlier attack. Then, at exactly 2:08 p.m., the underwater environment was rocked by a sequence of 4 massive explosions. These were unlike the depth charges. Their echoes reverberated for a long time, Kosler believed they were the sounds of secondary explosions, possibly from the Shokaku's bomb or fuel storage. Around 15 minutes later, Cavalla reached periscope depth again, but visibility was poor due to heavy rain squalls in the vicinity. The attack had concluded, and the crew began to relax their silent running procedures. Over the course of 3 harrowing hours, Japanese destroyers had dropped a staggering total of 106 depth charges, 56 of which had exploded dangerously close to the submarine. By about 7 p.m., the Cavalla finally surfaced and began moving away. From the area, an hour into their retreat, Kosler transmitted a message to Pearl Harbor, reporting that they had likely sunk a Shokaku-class aircraft carrier with 3 confirmed torpedo hits. He detailed the ensuing depth charge attack and the large explosions heard afterward, expressing confidence with the words, "I believe we sunk her." This day had been one of the most nerve-wracking of the patrol. The Shokaku had been a veteran of numerous pivotal battles, including the attack on Pearl Harbor and the battles of Coral Sea and Santa Cruz. Japanese records offered only limited details about her final moments, though surviving crew members later claimed that 4 torpedoes, not 3, had hit the vessel. The damage likely breached a fuel storage compartment, igniting a fire that was temporarily contained. Despite valiant efforts to save her, the carrier remained afloat only for a few hours before succumbing to internal explosions. These final blasts, possibly from a munition store or ignited vapors, were likely the ones heard clearly aboard Cavalla. Shokaku sank into the depths, taking with her 1,272 crew members. Around 570 sailors were rescued by the light cruiser Yahagi and the destroyers Irakazi and Hatsuzuki. Although Cavalla had suffered through intense retaliation, the damage she sustained was minimal. 2 of her motors and the sonar system had failed, and a ventilation pipe had been damaged. But these were small prices to pay for the monumental achievement of sinking a major Japanese aircraft carrier. Cavalla continued her patrol through June, until she was ordered to sail for Saipan near the month's end. At approximately 2:30 p.m. on July 1, 1944, Cavalla rendezvoused with the destroyer USS Philip, which would escort her the rest of the way. As dawn broke near Saipan, the crew was greeted with an unforgettable sight. The waters were teeming with every kind of ship imaginable. Smoke billowed from the combat areas, and the sounds of gunfire echoed from the island. After anchoring southwest of Saipan, Cavalla was surrounded by a sprawling flotilla. They were warned that Japanese air attacks were typically nocturnal, yet daytime watchposts remained active, and anti-aircraft guns were ready in case of surprise raids. At 1:10 p.m., while refueling from the tanker Kago, Cavalla welcomed a delegation aboard representatives from the offices of Admirals Spruance, Turner, and Hill, along with 6 war correspondents and a photographer, visited the submarine. For the next hour, Kosler was inundated with questions, most of them focused on his attack against the Japanese fleet. After the hour-long exchange, the guests departed, and the crew resumed preparations for departure. Kosler later reflected that their time at Saipan was among the most fascinating experiences of his life. The crew had front-row seats to one of the most intense marine battles of the war. On August 3, Cavalla completed her first war patrol, docking at Majuro after 64 days at sea. The following month was spent resting, training, and undergoing standard maintenance. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was a devastating defeat for the Imperial Japanese Navy. The Americans later coined the aerial confrontation as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot due to the lopsided outcome. Japanese land-based aircraft proved ineffective against the American fleet. Admiral Spruance had located the enemy and struck back hard. In addition to the losses of Taiho and Shokaku from submarine attacks, the Japanese also lost a third carrier, Hayo, along with hundreds of aircraft. Other ships sustained varying degrees of damage. In the closing stages of the war, Cavalla was assigned to lifeguard duty near Japan. She sailed into Tokyo Bay by the end of August and remained there for Japan's formal surrender on September 2, 1945. Throughout her service, Cavalla completed 6 war patrols and was credited with sinking 4 Japanese vessels. Yet, it was her maiden patrol and the sinking of Shokaku that remained the most celebrated accomplishment of her wartime legacy. The story of the USS Cavalla's daring strike against the Shokaku is a powerful reminder of the silent yet critical role submarines played in shifting the balance of naval warfare during World War II. While battleships and aircraft carriers often captured the spotlight, it was vessels like Cavalla, operating deep beneath the surface, that delivered some of the most devastating blows to the enemy. The precision, courage, and patience displayed by Commander Kosler and his crew reflect the high stakes and constant tension these submariners faced. Their success not only crippled one of Japan's most seasoned carriers, but also played a crucial part in the larger outcome of the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The sinking of Shokaku marked more than just the loss of a ship. It signaled the steady decline of Japanese naval air power. Cavalla's legacy lives on, not just in military history, but as a testament to the extraordinary bravery of those who served below the waves. Unseen but undeniably vital to ultimate victory.